This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, November 24th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. We begin with some good news for all of us. A coronavirus vaccine developed by Britain's University of Oxford and the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca has shown successful results in early trials. The vaccine appears suitable for fast rollout around the globe. Henry Ridgwell has our report.
Early analysis of trials involving 20,000 volunteers in Britain and Brazil show the Oxford University AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine is at least 70% effective after 2 doses. In volunteers given a different dosing regime, a half dose followed by a full dose, that figure rose to 90%. None of those given the vaccine developed severe COVID-19.
To me, it really feels like a great moment that we've got now multiple vaccines. If we can get them rolled out as soon as possible, we're going to have a big impact.
AstraZeneca plans to begin supplying hundreds of millions of doses by the end of the year, subject to regulatory approval. Doctors say several properties of the vaccine make it suitable for global rollout.
The first is cost. So this vaccine has been priced about 1/5 to 1/10 of the cost reportedly being sought by Pfizer and Moderna, some of the other leading vaccine candidates.
AstraZeneca has pledged it won't make a profit on the vaccine during the pandemic.
In 10 countries, it's already being manufactured, including a very large manufacturing partner in India. So we hope to see very large numbers of doses become available very quickly. And then thirdly, this vaccine only requires kind of fridge temperature storage.
By contrast, the Pfizer vaccine requires storage at -70 degrees Celsius. Many health systems in developing nations lack refrigeration facilities to store medicines at ultra-cold temperatures. So far, 188 countries have signed up to an initiative called COVAX, where richer countries invest in the development of several vaccines and the infrastructure required for rolling them out across the globe.
And the goal, in a perfect world, would be that each of the countries that sign up for COVAX would receive enough vaccine for 20% of their populations by the end of 2021. Now, that's an aspiration, of course, not a guarantee, but that would allow every country to at least begin to cover the most vulnerable, frontline workers, etc.
It's possible the leading vaccine candidates will be given emergency approval by regulators in the coming weeks, raising hopes that the world is on the brink of a major breakthrough in the fight against the pandemic. In the meantime, doctors say it's vital that people follow measures to suppress the transmission of the virus. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
2 pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer and BioNTech, have also announced that the efficacy portion of their COVID-19 vaccine trial has been completed, showing the vaccine to prevent 95% of cases of the virus. Other companies like Moderna and AstraZeneca say their vaccine trials show that it is safe and provoked a strong immune response. Africa 54, Linord Moudou spoke to Dr. Richard Mihigo, Deputy Incident Manager for Emergency Response at the WHO Regional Office for Africa.
The announcement by Pfizer and BioNTech, it's a new vaccine that is using a new platform for development called messenger RNA. So it's a vaccine that uses a new technology aiming at prompting the human organism or immunity system to recognize the virus and create antibody that could fight the disease itself when someone gets into contact with it.
When people are vaccinated, how long does it take before they start developing immunity? And then how long does the immunity last?
So usually in a classic manner, when someone gets a vaccine, the body will react by increasing very quickly its ability to produce a defense organism that will protect the organism. So we see the defense augmenting quite rapidly. But for your question, for how long the protection will last, it's very difficult for novel product to tell how long it will take. So I think what is reassuring is that the preliminary data that went out showing a very high efficacy rate, and then time will tell us for how long this protection may last. If we will need an additional injection like a year after, or a booster dose to make sure that the level of protection remain high in the organism. But this is something that we will need to follow up as the vaccine is being rolled out.
Now, Dr. Mihigo, vaccine development is usually a long process, which sometimes can take 10 years or even more or less, it depends. How safe is a vaccine that has been developed within a year?
Well, I think the typical, as you said, process for developing a vaccine takes time. Depend of the technology used, maybe between 3 to 7 years. But I think what we have seen, particularly with COVID-19 vaccines, is that things that were developed in the past in a sequential manner were this time along done in parallel. I think the last things that we have seen is that the new technology has helped a lot to kind of not cut short the corner, as we said, but at least to improve on the process that's in the past were taking so many years. But now that we've seen a much more advanced process on getting through these very rigorous, by the way, clinical trial phases.
There are concerns about the ability for developing nations to deploy vaccines that requiring specialized handling. What do we know about this vaccine in terms of the way it's supposed to be stored and also properly cared for?
Well, it's true that the two vaccines that have been announced so far comes with additional challenges in terms of cold chain equipment, particularly the vaccine from Pfizer that needs to be stored at minus 70 or 80 degrees Celsius. So this is something not usual and will definitely create a lot of challenges. But I would like to say that this is not the first time, though we recognize all the challenges that could be a country could went through. But we have at least a minimum of experience in few countries. I don't know if you know the Ebola vaccines that were developed by Merck Pharmaceutical. Also, it's a vaccine that also is kept at minus 70 degrees. And this vaccine was able to be deployed in DRC.
There has been a growing mistrust concerning a COVID-19 vaccine in Africa, but it's not just an African problem. We're seeing this in the United States and around the world, really, and especially taking into consideration the fact that it has been developed so quickly.
Well, you're right, and you're right to point out that this mistrust is not only in Africa. I think it's a growing concern everywhere. It's quite important to say that for WHO, it's very crucial that any product, any vaccines that is approved by WHO goes first through a very rigorous evaluation system to look at the safety, to look at the innocuity of such product, to make sure that there is no severe adverse event that could harm people.
Dr. Richard Mihigo, thank you so much for your time and answering our questions today.
Thank you very much for your invitation. It was my pleasure.
Pfizer applied for an emergency use authorization on Friday from the Food and Drug Administration for its vaccine candidate. A decision by the FDA is expected in December. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is urging countries in Africa to be on high alert for a possible surge in COVID-19 cases as the end of year approaches and many families plan get-togethers. Healthcare workers treating COVID-19 patients say the work is taking a toll on their mental state. Some have fallen into depression and need therapy. Mohammed Yusuf reports from Nairobi.
John Moishohio is one of thousands of Kenyan medical workers treating COVID-19 patients. With the stress of the pandemic already on him, in late July he also tested positive for the virus.
As a human being also, I'm also thinking aloud that I'm positive for COVID. What will happen next? What if death comes? And it's not easy. It is really a traumatizing state, and especially being out there. You cannot tell people because you don't know how people will take it.
Moishohio is one or more than 700 Kenyan medical workers to test positive for COVID-19. A trained psychologist, he was so upset by the diagnosis, he had to seek counseling himself. He wasn't alone. On an August weekend, 50 medical workers from Tigray Hospital Treatment Center attended mental wellness counseling sessions.
We have been going through a lot. The schedules have changed. We have been very busy, and so having a day off where you're having fun, forgetting there's COVID, it was very, 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 very rejuvenating.
I feel a bit lighter. I feel like I'm very relieved. I feel like I have now gained the strength to continue with my daily duties.
Like their colleagues worldwide, Kenyan medical workers have been working long hours to attend to patients infected with the virus.
A lot of those small trauma end up piling up, and it can be really psychologically distressing. So we decided that we will come here and have a day of expressive therapy, debriefing, art therapy, bonding, and having fun and games. You know, it was a day to make the health workers feel like they are loved and appreciated.
With the pandemic ongoing, it is a day that these medical workers certainly needed. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
Voting continues in Burkina Faso. Incumbent President Roch Kabore was leading with just 12 of around 360 voting districts declared on Monday, according to the Electoral Commission. The Sunday presidential vote was dominated by the threat of Islamist violence. An association of the opposition parties cast doubt on the credibility of the results on Monday, repeating allegations of irregularities and fraud during a joint news conference. Ahead of the vote, international observers said they had seen no evidence of fraud. Analysts expect a tight race that could go to a second round if no candidate wins more than 50%. In the Horn of Africa, Tigrayan forces said on Tuesday they had destroyed an Ethiopian army division in battles to control the northern region, where a 3-week-old war has killed hundreds and spread global alarm. The federal government denied that and said many Tigrayan soldiers were surrendering in line with a 72-hour ultimatum before a threatened attack on the regional capital, Mekelle. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's troops launched an offensive against the Tigray People's Liberation Front local government on November 4th and said they are closing in on Mekelle in a final push to win the conflict. But the battle-hardened TPLF said their troops are keeping the federal army at bay and scoring some big victories. Reuters news agency has been unable to verify statements made by either side since phone and internet connections to Tigray are down and access to the area strictly controlled. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover during the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, U.S. President-elect Joe Biden announces several of his top cabinet picks as he prepares for the official transition process. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. President-elect Joe Biden has announced several of his top cabinet picks, naming his longtime close advisor and former Deputy Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, as his choice to be the next Secretary of State. Blinken is known as a staunch supporter of international alliances, human rights, and refugees. VOA diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain has more.
Iran made a fundamental choice.
Antony Blinken served as Deputy Secretary of State during the former Obama-Biden administration and has been advising President-elect Joe Biden since 2002. He graduated from high school in Paris, France, and is a strong supporter of NATO and other alliances and multilateral institutions. Blinken led the U.S. response to a global refugee crisis, and in 2016, he appeared on the American children's show Sesame Street to explain who refugees are and how we can all learn from each other.
These are people who've had to leave their homes because life in their countries was not safe for them. Grover, can you imagine how difficult it would be to have to leave your home?
No, I cannot. I would never want to leave Sesame Street.
Some analysts say Blinken's first priority will be to repair relationships and rejoin agreements President Donald Trump quit, like the Iran nuclear deal and others.
I think his first and most major priority will be restoring the perception of the United States as a trusted ally and partner around the world. I think he's going to want to shore up relationships that were damaged. Essentially, the mantra is we're back. Re-enter the United States into the Paris Climate Accords, trying to find a way potentially to extend the New START agreement.
In another announcement, veteran diplomat Linda Thomas-Greenfield is Biden's choice to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
But what I did have, I had the hopes and the dreams of my mother, who taught me at a very early age that I could face any challenge or adversity put in my path.
If confirmed by the Senate, Blinken would assume State Department leadership from Mike Pompeo, who has served as Secretary of State since April 2018. Cindy Sain, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden says he will nominate Linda Thomas-Greenfield to serve as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Thomas-Greenfield has more than 35 years of foreign policy experience, including as U.S. Ambassador to Liberia and as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. Before the November 3rd election, Thomas-Greenfield joined Straight Talk Africa host Shaka Sali and Professor Jendai Fraser to discuss similarities in how Democratic and Republican U.S. presidents approach Africa.
So we've seen a continuation broadly of Africa initiatives across administrations, and on the Hill, it has always been bipartisan. But I come from a different perspective than Jendai. I'm a career professional. And so I have worked in every administration, and where the policies fall in both administrations, I've always carried out those policies and carried them out as a loyal bureaucratic professional. But I think every administration, whether you argue it's strategic or that it's paternalistic, both administrations have looked at Africa as a partnership and have looked at ways to address issues in Africa.
Thomas-Greenfield said more world powers are paying more attention to Africa, and it is increasingly up to younger Africans to make sure the continent is treated fairly.
Africa is the last frontier. I say that all the time. There are no opportunities anywhere else in the world like there are on the African continent. And I think we're seeing it around the globe. Everyone is seeing it. And I think the important thing is that Africans themselves benefit from that last frontier.
That is Linda Thomas-Greenfield speaking to VOA's Shaka Sali before the November 3rd U.S. presidential election. Following President-elect Biden's announcement to include her in his cabinet, she tweeted, "My mother taught me to lead with the power of kindness and compassion to make the world a better place. I've carried that lesson with me throughout my career in foreign service, and if confirmed, will do the same as ambassador to the United Nations." U.S. presidents often change government policy through presidential actions, issuing executive orders, proclamations, or memoranda, bypassing Congress and the legislative process. President Donald Trump has relied heavily on that tactic, and President-elect Joe Biden has promised to do the same. Michael Sullivan has our report.
Through an executive order in January 2017, Trump temporarily restricted immigration from majority Muslim countries that he said were hotbeds of terrorism. The move was widely criticized and quickly blocked in the courts, setting up legal battles. A less sweeping immigration ban was later upheld, but is likely to be reversed by Joe Biden, who will be sworn in as president January 20th.
Because almost any order can be reversed by a subsequent order, we can be very confident that Joe Biden is going to come in with his guns blazing in terms of executive orders.
The first president, George Washington, issued the first of what were called executive orders, giving instructions to government departments. Abraham Lincoln later freed slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation, which consisted of two separate executive orders during the Civil War. Franklin Roosevelt signed more than 3,700 executive orders, the most of any president. The power to take unilateral actions is not spelled out in the Constitution, which simply says the president is in charge of the executive branch of government.
They emerge because they are a natural application of the broad grant of executive power that's in the Constitution.
One of Franklin Roosevelt's orders, later widely criticized, confined Japanese Americans in camps during the Second World War. Trump has also used executive actions to implement controversial policy changes, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement a climate accord, for example, bypassing Congress.
Separation of powers, constitutional questions are now, being ripped from the headlines every day.
In Trump's first year in office, he issued 55 executive orders, including one that authorized wall construction on the southern border. Sometimes the branches of government have worked together. The Supreme Court through a landmark ruling, and President Dwight Eisenhower through executive action integrated schools in the 1950s. But sometimes presidents act on their own, inviting conflict with other branches of government. Harry Truman nationalized steel mills during the Korean War.
That was really attempting to take over private industry for purposes of serving the war effort. The court said that's not okay. Of course, it was a completely different court.
Trump is using his last 2 months in office to leave his mark on government through other powers of the presidency, installing loyalists in key jobs and issuing government regulations.
One of the things we're going to see from the Trump administration is a furious production of regulations over the course of the next 2 months to try to nail down things that will be hard that would just cause delay.
Slowing but not stopping Biden's efforts to change course. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News.
Knife-making skills have been practiced for thousands of years. VOA's Gabrielle Weiss brings us the story of a craftsman in Wilmot, New Hampshire, who has elevated it into an art.
I don't think there's any real art without craft, and I don't think there's any real craft without art. But I had a debate with an art professor at the School and Museum of Fine Arts, and this was a nice guy. I really liked him. I liked his class. He was a drawing teacher. And I was working on a knife during the course of a semester. And then he wrapped his hand around the blade, covering the blade, and he looked at the handle and he goes, "This is really beautiful. I love what you've done with the materials and texture and colors and all of that. If it didn't have a blade, then it would be art. Then it would be beautiful." And I was like, come on, I just rolled my eyes at him. My name is Zach Jonas. I am a master bladesmith working out of New Hampshire. I make custom knives in all shapes and sizes, anything from hunting knives to cooking knives to samurai swords. I studied philosophy and I enjoyed critical thinking and debating and all of that. So after college, I got a job at a corporate law firm in Boston, and the idea of having to pay your dues for 15 years before life becomes anything other than a professional misery. You know, you're a paralegal, you're filing, you're doing whatever you're doing, which was a good test for me to realize that that field was not going to be my passion. This is one of my favorite knives I've ever made, and this sword is kind of its spiritual big brother. There's a lot of similarity to the shape and the flow of it, and this is a really complicated piece, and I got a lot of the ideas from this. In theory, the title of Mastersmith means that I have the skills to do almost literally anything that someone could come up with, or at least to learn how to do it. So I do a lot of kitchen knives, I do a lot of hunting knives, desk knives, things like that, letter openers, and more elaborate projects like swords and daggers and art pieces, you know, pieces that are built to be functional, but have enough time put into the appearance that they're meant more for a display purpose. One of the things that I love about knives is their connection to the ancient past, and I mean truly ancient past. You know, I mean, just imagine life today, out in the woods. If you had to go out in the woods and survive for a week and you couldn't cut anything, that would be tricky. So the amount of power that mankind gained by adding the cutting edge to his, you know, arsenal is huge. It's hard. It's hard work, and it's pretty dangerous. You know, just about every tool in my studio can hurt me or worse, quickly or slowly. But I feel really fortunate to be able to do what I do and to have my life set up the way that it is. I get to do what I love. I get to do it as much as I want, pretty much, which is a real, I mean, it's a good place to be.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.